I'm not gonna lie, it took everything within me to not blurt out Life of Brian references throughout this movie. The Book of Clarence is a new biblical dramedy and is about a man named Clarence who seeks to find a better life for himself by claiming that he is a Messiah. If you guys remember my list of my most anticipated movies of this year, you'll remember that this movie was one of my honorable mentions. Everything about this movie enticed me just from seeing the trailers. The jokes were good, the cast was amazing, so for the longest time I kept this movie on my radar, just waiting for this movie's release, and now that it is and I finally got to see it, I can honestly say, it's okay. Yeah, it's fine. Okay, before I'm sure a lot of you guys go nuts in the comments, let me just say everything I liked about this movie I really loved. Starting with probably the most obvious great thing about this movie, the cast. Everyone in this film is fantastic. Whether they're giving dramatic performances or comedic performances, no one is sleepwalking and everyone is giving it their all. Especially Lakeith Stanfield, who I have loved for the longest time. I've always thought that he was an amazing actor, and every single time he shows up in a movie, I know he's going to give a great performance. And this film was no different. He was fantastic as Clarence, and he brought so many layers to the character. But again, as I said earlier, everyone in this movie is brilliant. I also really like that this movie tried to emulate the style of classic biblical epics like the Ten Commandments at times. In terms of the title cards and the scene transitions, this movie really does try to emulate that old-fashioned feel. In terms of the comedy, however, that's where the movie's kind of fast and loose. When the comedy is good, it's really great, and a lot of the reasons why the comedy in this movie really works is because the actors are fantastic, they have great chemistry with each other, and you really do like the characters. Every single character in this movie is very grounded in a way that you can definitely see the biblical nature of them, but they're so down to earth that you can relate a lot of their problems to modern day problems. Whether a lot of that could have really happened back then, or this was just the satire coming through, this movie, especially with its characters, definitely manages to feel epic but also grounded at the same time. Plus, I absolutely loved the music for a similar reason why I love the characters. The music feels so biblical and epic, and yet at the same time the vocals are very modern, and I really did like the mixture of those two styles of music. However, when the jokes don't land, and unfortunately that happens a lot of the time, it's usually just from the dialogue stating the obvious of what we just saw. And most of the time, what we just saw was funny, and if that was the punchline, then that would be good. But instead, the punchline is just the line of dialogue saying, "Oh, that happened!" And that does lead me into some of my biggest problems of the movie, starting with the tone. Don't get me wrong, I loved the drama, and for the most part, I really liked the comedy, but for the life of it, this movie could not mesh those two tones together. One scene will focus entirely on comedy, and literally the next scene will be a very dramatic moment of self-reflection, followed immediately by Clarence giving wisecracks to a whole bunch of centurions. The movie can never mesh its two tones together. It creates this overall layer of confusion surrounding the movie that through a lot of it, you're just constantly wondering, okay, what are you trying to say? This movie is 2 hours long and feels like 2.5. And I feel like the biggest way they could have tightened the runtime a bit is by focusing way more on Clarence. Don't get me wrong, Clarence is the main character, and the main problems of the movie center around his plights. But for some reason, especially halfway through the movie, it feels like the film is struggling to find a way to really focus on Clarence while still being able to pad out the runtime. So instead, halfway through the movie, the film tries to balance the scenes with Clarence with scenes of Jesus and the apostles. And don't get me wrong, in the first half of the movie, they are definitely characters in the story, but they are still very much so supporting characters. And we focus on them so much throughout the last half of the film that at times it feels like Jesus and the apostles are just as much main characters as Clarence. So despite the fact that I do have major problems with the overall structure of the film, I definitely think that the acting is strong enough, the style is strong enough, and the music is strong enough to at least make this a good one-time watch. I'm gonna give the Book of Clarence a B-. It's a perfectly fine movie, but I don't think the whole is as great as the sum of its parts. Guys, definitely stay tuned for my next video, which will be the first review of one of my favorite movies of all time. It's one that I love to show people, it's one that I love to talk about, and it's one that I know I'm gonna love talking about with you guys. Thank you all so much for watching. You guys are the best, and don't forget to click subscribe and click that bell icon down below to stay up to date on all things movie, all things TV, all things nerd.